Hey everybody, this is Jon Croft with Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft, and I am Jon Croft. How you doing, everybody? Rebecca's here. How you doing, Rebecca?
Hi, Jon Croft. I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great. Doing awesome. So yeah, we just had a great week. We've had a few great weeks in a row because there's been some great content. Some great trailers.
There has, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it's been like getting ready for shows and just hearing about shows, trailers, etc. But this time it was a really good show. We actually saw. So
Yeah, so have you been having any media experiences this week?
yes. Yes, I have, and you have too, so I hear.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
I have.
Last night we both saw House of David, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Now we only saw the first episode, and there's actually three episodes. So we have not seen all three episodes. We can only comment on the first episode. But I was very impressed. What do you think, honey?
It was so good.
It was
It
pretty
was so
good.
it was so good. It was obviously like a higher budget than The Chosen.
Hmm.
Um, but really good writing. So far it really seems like it has that kind of has that heart of sticking to the story and sticking to like the character of God. And then as they add things, they add it, in the context of who God is. They're not trying to be like uber historical and they're not trying to be like put their own spin on it or put some kind of popular perspective on it.
Right.
They're just really enjoying the story and the history of the story and the
Similarly,
characters.
similarly to The Chosen, I think they're trying to be really authentic with
Authentic. Yeah.
the original story, like what it's
Yeah.
really trying to say in that culture, in that cultural context. And also, I think they're trying to include things that not the church is very keen on now, that the church seems to understand now better than maybe they did 100 years ago with some doctrine. So like, there's little things that the chosen keeps in there, and plus the chosen has more time to invest, right? Where a lot of like movies wouldn't have the time to delve deeper into Jesus's story, which is what gets them into trouble, right? With a lot of people, because people are used to just seeing a very cursory telling of the story of Christ because they
Hmm.
only have 2 hours. And so what happens is people don't get the freedom, the artists don't get the freedom to tell the story that they maybe wanted to dig deeper into, right?
Yeah.
Such as, like Ben-Hur, right? Ben-Hur was kind of like um seemed like 99% fictional. And nobody had a problem with that, right? Because it was the story of Ben-Hur.
Hmm.
The truth is it wasn't just a story of Ben-Hur, it was the story of Christ in the background.
Yeah.
So, like The Chosen is like Ben-Hur in that way. Sure, it's the
Yeah.
story of Jesus, but it's also the story of the disciples.
Yeah.
And so, are they going to have a lot of stuff written about the disciples? Like extra biblical stuff? Sure, there's some extra biblical. Do we trust all that stuff? So, like, you're going to get yourself in trouble with a lot of people who want to take these things very seriously and do take them seriously, and they should take them seriously. But sometimes they get angry and upset, right? When someone's taking things seriously as well, but they're emphasizing other things that they don't want to emphasize. That's always the choice as an artist, isn't it? It's like, what part of this story should I emphasize?
Hmm.
And what part of it should I kind of like gloss over a little bit? Or like, I
Yeah.
don't want to dig down deep into that part of the story. I want to dig into another part of the story.
Yeah.
And so, like, The Chosen starts with like Mary Magdalene and a bunch of stuff that's not in the Bible. And people get upset about that. But the truth is, how did this stuff in the Bible that did happen in the Bible, how did that happen? So it had to happen in a similar way as The Chosen showed it. had to. So it's just because we live in the real world, we know that these some of these things had to happen. And so similarly with House of David, right? We know a lot of things are had to have happened. So we can get into that because there's a lot of great stuff here to get into. But you know what? If you don't mind, we can show a little bit of the beginning clip of the
Okay.
first episode because
Yeah.
they actually shared a sneak peek clip of the first episode on YouTube. It's on YouTube, and but it's like the first, I don't know, a few minutes. So let's
Okay.
just play some of this. It's just really great. Oh, here we go. So this is House of David, season one, episode one. And this is actually how it starts.
Can one stone change the course of history? Can one act of defiance create a legend? I will tell you the story of David, a simple shepherd boy, an outcast, who became one of the most famous kings who ever lived. There was a time Israel had no king. 500 years after Moses
I
split
love
the
that
sea,
water effect of the
the
waves
people
coming
were
up.
leaderless and
Yeah.
divided.
So awesome.
So, Samuel, the last of the great seers, anointed Saul of the tribe of Benjamin as Israel's first king. But Samuel warned the people not to forget the God that delivered them from Egypt. For 25 years, Saul has reigned, beloved by the people, triumphant in every battle. As Saul's arrogance grows, a rift between him and Samuel festers. With each new victory, the people of Israel trust more in a throne than in their God.
May the house of Saul endure forever.
This is a good place to stop it. I know there's more here, and you're going to see Goliath here in a second, but this beginning with Goliath is kind of like a teaser of what's to come later because they don't show the entire conflict with Goliath here. It's kind of like a prequel to that, which will come later. And so they go back into David's story and they go back into Saul's story.
Yeah.
And let me close this here.
They do seem to bounce around a lot, which I liked. I liked that.
Yeah, I think there's a comfortable amount of bouncing around. It's not uncomfortable. But they basically just go between these two stories, which is the story of Saul and the story of David. And in between them is Samuel, but Samuel mostly just shows up for the Saul portion of this right now. And Samuel is just incredible. I think he's even better cast than David. I mean, he's just like he's so perfect for that role.
Yeah.
And I loved that dude. He was just so great.
Should we give a quick synopsis of what happens in that first episode?
Basically, we're talking about, they kind of already did in some ways. They set you up, right? They're setting you up here for David to come into being. Can one stone change the course of history? That's representing David, and who of course kills Goliath with a stone. Saul is the king that comes before him. He's the first king of Israel. And in my article I wrote about this, by the way, I kind of uh, come down on the show for saying what they said, which is that they didn't have a king and they were leaderless for 500 years. And so they wanted a king and they acted like that was a good thing. They're getting a king. This is so great. They were leaderless for 500 years. But like I don't think that's a good way to set it up because the truth is, and by the end of this first episode, you see that Samuel is telling you this, right? Samuel is telling you, hey, God is your leader. And because you want an earthly king, you want what is not good for your nation. And you've rejected God as your leader.
Hmm.
And so I was kind of complaining about it because I was like, the show is exemplifying this same um, terrible attitude that the Israelis had at this time, which is to want a king. And so it's acting like, oh, we want and need David as our king coming up. The truth is, we shouldn't have to have David. We shouldn't have to have Saul. We shouldn't have to have Solomon. And even David and Solomon were not great, perfect kings, rather. They were good kings, but they weren't even great kings, but they weren't perfect kings. And God warned them about this is that every king is going to have their um, vices, and every king is going to take steal taxes from the people and
Yeah.
is going to abuse the power that they have in some way. And the reason that they wanted to do this was cultural reasons, right? Just like how God is against polygamy, multiple marriages, just like how God is against slavery. These are cultural things that God doesn't like, but he kind of puts up with it and wants you to put down your toys eventually and become an adult. And so like he wants people to stop like picking up their toys and acting like children and accept God as their God and as their leader. And people just continually kind of ignore what God is trying to tell them. Samuel is an example of this. Samuel is telling people in this story, um, listen, God is supposed to be your king. God is supposed to be your God. So the fact that you're putting too much trust in this Saul guy is an issue. So I'll just say they're delving into they're framing the story, right, where Saul has been king for 25 years. He's now gone arrogant. David is shown as a boy who actually looks like a young man in this. So I do wish that they'd shown him a little younger, but that's okay. That's going to be hard to do if you're going to do a series for a long period. So I understand them doing that. He's a young looking man, and that's probably the best you can do, considering the incredible physical challenges ahead of this actor. That makes sense. And he does a great job
Yeah.
as David. One of the things that they add, we were just talking about extra biblical things, is that they add something similar to how The Chosen adds something. They add the idea that David is a bastard child. And this is why, this is of course why Jesse doesn't include him when Samuel is looking for the next heir.
Mm.
Jesse doesn't include him. Why? Because in a way, he's not really his son, but he is his son, isn't he? And so he's treating David with a bit of disrespect here. But that explains why he does this, but it also explains how he's treated differently than his brothers. He's kind of left out in the field to care for the sheep and treated badly in many ways, almost like Joseph. He's like a Joseph in a way, right?
Mhm.
Where he's special, and and as a result, he's treated badly, or at least like, oh, that other person over there, we don't really pay attention to what he says. And so David is kind of like, you see him as this kind of character.
Yeah.
And these are often the kind of characters God uses. So this makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
And so back at with the Saul situation, Saul has just defeated his enemies, but there's a looming enemy in the background, which is this giant, supposedly. They haven't seen the giant yet. Of course, we see the little prequel moment where Goliath is going to come, right? Um, but we're kind of working up to that point now. And um, Jonathan, who is the son of Saul, is shown to be a very honorable soldier, an honorable son, and some of his other brothers are not so honorable, as you'll
Hmm.
see. And so it's kind of revealing the family of Saul, as I think you
Yeah.
called them Kardashians,
Yeah, we're introduced to Saul's family.
right?
So we see like his wife and his daughters and of course Jonathan and I guess there's some other brothers there. And and they do a really good job. They really feel like a slightly like entitled sort of
Yeah.
family. Like there's kind of a sassiness there, kind of a like lackadaisicalness, like they don't have a lot to do. They're just sort of wealthy. And I thought they did a really good job with that character development. And then they do a great job with Saul in that he clearly is this beloved king and he loves it. Like he loves
Yeah.
being
He loves
the
the
king that,
adulation. Yeah.
yeah, he loves being the king that everybody loves. And he has some moments where somebody's playfully telling him he's being too generous. And he's like, I love to be generous. And he's like, well, you know, financial benefit is not as long lasting for the people. They're not going to be as loyal to you just because you're giving them all this wealth. And
And that's what someone says to him too. I think that was
yeah,
Jethro who
yeah.
says that to him. And
And you can,
he's like, but this is the time to enjoy it. Like
right.
basically. So enjoy it, enjoy your gifts that the king gives you for special favors, right?
Yeah. There's
And
a,
I love this because it sets you up for the end of the episode, which is
that's,
when
yeah,
Samuel comes into the room, basically.
it does.
It's great.
And I liked too right at the beginning. We haven't quite seen this part in the clip yet, but we do see Goliath and they do a really good job with that. It looks great. And and Jonathan turns to Saul and says, um, he's only a man. Like as if Saul was afraid. And Jonathan is trying to encourage him. He says he's only a man. But
Yeah,
we find out later, we see as the story unfolds that
that's
Saul
presaging. Yep,
Saul loves the approval of men. Like he
yep.
fears man rather than God.
That's where the quote comes from Samuel.
Yeah.
It's
What was
it's
the
a
quote?
famous quote. You should fear God rather than man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really good the way they unfolded all of that. And there's this interesting element there where they've got the is it the Amalekites that they're fighting?
I think so, yeah.
And they portray the Amalekites as just being like really like horrific.
They're not just some typical people, right? They
Yeah,
are
they're not just a
demon
tribal people.
possessed kind of terrible who do terrible things against people.
Yeah, they call them
And
cannibals.
yeah, cannibals, witches, sorcerers. I
Yeah,
mean, and that's not an innocuous statement either. They torture people, they, curse them,
yeah,
like all these things. And you see some of that too, by the way, when it shows Saul, who God commanded to kill this evil king, and Saul instead has him grovel at his feet and believes that this is what mighty kings should be doing.
yeah,
And so this is again a cultural thing that he thinks is culturally important to do as a king. And Samuel is very disappointed in him when he finds, I think he says, uncleanness is not where it should be, or something like
yeah,
that. So Samuel has a different view of God's leadership and his command over Israel, and Saul kind of sees it, I think, as a suggestion at this point, but not something he has to do.
yeah,
Um, and he's using his own brain instead of being obedient, which
yeah.
is biblically accurate. So
It is. Yeah,
um, I think just like the chosen, the primary message of the scripture is coming through very well. So I'm very impressed by that. And I'm not offended by the fact that they have David, a bastard child. I don't think that that was too far to take that. Um, it also makes him relatable.
hmm,
And and by the way, the music that he plays, the harp, was his mother's harp who
yeah,
died. And so
yeah,
in a way, she was all that the harp was all that's left of his mother.
yeah,
So this is why he's he's so good with music because he turns to music when he's in dark times, and he's obviously good at music, and so he watches his sheep and plays music. This is the funny thing about this is, there's the House of David, there's this other story about David too. Yeah, and even there's Sight and Sound Film Studios who's doing a show on David right now. It all
Mm.
seems to be following in the same vein of the Angel movie that's coming up this November, I believe, called David. It's an animated movie called David, and it looks like it's stealing the thunder from Disney. It's totally
Yeah,
stealing like Pixar and Disney
looks
thunder.
amazing.
It's going to like I think it's going to be the biggest movie of the year.
Yeah,
Um, like I mean, who knows? I'm making a prediction, but this could be the biggest movie of the year because obviously these really charming animated films with great characters and beautiful animation tend to make boatloads of money.
yeah,
And this movie will probably do that. And I think House of David could even contribute to its success because it's making people fall in love with David again. And so I think that's, in fact, I think I even have, here we go. This is a David t-shirt.
oh yeah.
David.
So is that David the movie that's coming out?
Yeah, this is the animated movie. This is the Angel t-shirt. But I can't wait for that movie. I think that's going to be incredible.
It is.
As it comes to House of David, like I say, this is the first one we've seen. It was quite good. It's I describe it as slick, and so it is a little bit slick.
Yeah,
By the way, I don't think of that as a good or bad thing. I think of it as just it is what it is. Something
yeah,
that's highly produced, I think of it as slick. And slick things tend to be colorful, and they tend to be what would you call it? Too perfect in a way.
okay.
It's also very colorful, and it tends to be that Hollywood will use some kind of a color scheme that eliminates a lot of colors and it's not so saturated. So it was a
Mm-hmm.
bit saturated for me.
Yeah,
And that's not always the worst thing in the world, but I do think it was a little bit perfect, visually speaking.
mm,
And I like worlds that are lived in. They
yeah,
look real. There's dirty faces.
mm,
There's sweaty people. There's a few missing teeth every now and then, like stuff like that.
yeah,
That feels real. It feels authentic and real to me.
yeah.
But this one felt a little bit too well produced, I guess you could say. Or
Okay.
or what you could say also, like a good editor, you don't notice their editing. And so
Mm-hmm.
in this case, it's about not noticing, right? It's about not noticing how imperfect it is. And it's just the right amount of imperfect,
Yeah,
which resembles real life, right?
yeah,
And so I think that was a bit of a problem, but and this is also typical for faith-based stuff too.
mm,
Like you get like the makeup people who have done film, but they've done like actual makeup for people.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like they've got the makeup person who is not used to film, but is used to making someone look perfect.
yeah.
This is actually not what you want. You don't want people to look
Mhm.
perfect. You don't want them to look like they're going on an Instagram video. You want them to look like they have been beat up a little bit. Like, you know what I mean? Like they've just woken up, they've gotten out of bed and yeah, well, it doesn't even need to be that bad, right? It just needs to look lived in a little bit, you know? And so these are things that are important to me. Um, and
Yeah,
I think it was a little too saturated as well. But I did like a lot of the stuff. I think the visual effects, the lion visual
yeah,
effect was pretty good.
yeah. They have a lion threatening the sheep, and of course, like one of the coolest things that David says is, I have killed a lion and a bear.
Right.
And so that's coming, or you hope that they're going to show you um, that happening. And so
Yeah.
that was really cool. The lion looked amazing. I mean, I think it was real. I think they just put CG makeup, like they put blood on the lion's face to make him
Mhm.
look like he had been eating sheep.
Yeah. Well, and you do have to cast David correctly. In a way, I think you don't even need to show him killing the bear and the lion, but what you do have to do is show David as kind of like one of these wild card people who it's like they've done things. You know they've done things. It's just a lot of people don't pay attention to them because they're not paying attention in general, right? And so, but if you pay attention to David, you're like, you look like you've done some things,
Hmm.
right? And so he's got to be that kind of actor who looks he has to be sufficiently brooding,
Hmm.
right? Like if you do things, you start to think about, should I have done that? Like your life gets a little bit like complicated, right? But you also know that you are capable, right? Which can be a good or bad thing. You might feel bad about how capable you are, because you don't want to hurt people. But it's like, these are some of the things that people like the Davids of the world have to deal with, you know. When the other son of Saul doesn't, because the other son of Saul, not Jonathan, is kind of you know, he's a politician's son, essentially, and he's a hedonist. And so these are men who think that they are powerful, but they really haven't done things, and they
Yeah.
really don't know what they're missing by being a little more rough and tumble like Jonathan. And so people who've been on the track a little bit know just how pathetic these other people are. So you need people like the Davids who have done some things. And so when you see them and they come to the king and they're like, I've done some things. I think I can take
Hmm.
on Goliath.
Yeah.
You can kind of sense that confidence. That
Hmm.
confidence is required in this movie. Showing the lion is not. You see what I'm saying?
Hmm.
If you see the confidence in David, you also are convinced like Saul. You
Hmm.
have to be convinced like Saul in that scene. So that's required. Showing the lion is not required.
Yeah.
In fact, it's almost redundant.
Mm.
So, show David as a capable young man who's brooding, who's dealt with some things, who he doesn't get respect in a way that's bothersome at his younger age, but it's also like, well, I am a bastard son, so I guess I shouldn't expect too much respect here.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I have to do my job. I have to take care of my sheep. I have to do things that other people aren't willing to do because they'd
Yeah.
rather just shovel it at my doorstep. So now you've got a little more rough and tumble attitude and you can handle yourself, but nobody's given you stuff to prove yourself either. So once Goliath comes around and nobody else will do it, well, someone like David's like, I killed the lion. Nobody paid attention. Who cares? But I guess I know now that I could do something like this, and other people don't know. They don't know what they could do. They don't know
Yeah.
what I could do. But at least I'm willing to do something. That kind of character has real depth.
Hmm.
And so I think that it was such an important decision to cast this guy, uh,
Yeah.
Iskander, whatever his name is. He's doing a good job. I like it. And
Yeah. Yeah, I like him a lot too. I feel like a few things I picked up on from this first episode is just that it doesn't have as much it doesn't really have hardly anything lighthearted at all.
yeah, it's a little heavy, but it's fine.
Pretty heavy. It feels like it feels like it's going to be a little bit brutal. Um
Mhm. It's a bit like a Christian Game of Thrones.
yeah. And I was even going to ask you if it was faith-based because it doesn't have that vibe at all, really.
That's a
Um
good thing.
Yeah, except for the sense that, in a certain scene with Saul and Samuel, you can tell, I feel like I could tell where the director's heart was, and or producer's heart or writer's heart or wherever you want to say that. But otherwise, it doesn't really feel like typical faith-based at all.
Nope, it's not.
And it's kind of intense and kind of stressful.
Yeah.
Um, but it was really good. I feel like they're gonna, I don't know, I just feel like there's gonna be a lot of heartbreak and tension. And I know we have the Psalms and we have obviously the life of David, and it is a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
But the Psalms are so uplifting. Like they're so encouraging.
Yeah, they're also sad in places. They're also very sad, asking for the Lord's help, asking
Yeah,
where's my deliverance going to come from?
absolutely.
You know?
I guess I'm just hoping that we get some of that, like, well, you mentioned the movie, the movie that's coming
Yeah,
out,
that's
the
true. Yeah.
Disney movie.
That's
That
like
has,
kids.
well, I
He
guess
has
I'm
a kid.
still a kid, but it has some lighthearted moments, some moments that are uplifting is what I'm trying to say, where you feel um his connection with God. You feel his like
Yeah.
trust in God, his hope in God. And those moments are so encouraging to me to watch just in the trailer. So I guess I'm just saying I hope this show contains some of those kinds of moments.
Yeah, I mean the animated kids show by Angel, I think that's going to be more like way before Goliath. And it's going to be him as a kid, um, learning music and learning to take care of sheep and
Yeah,
following his adventures as a kid, as like a 10 or 12-year old. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
and that's very innocent. It's not heavy like this story.
hmm
And if there are heavy moments, these are heavy kid moments, like, oh, somebody's in danger, but I have to save them, and then I do with God's help,
hmm
right? But this is very heavy. This is more like the tone you get from Scripture.
yeah, yeah,
I've been so wanting and waiting for the church to be ready for real scriptural stories,
yeah, hmm
stories that have the deep, dark messages of the Bible in them. And I've been disappointed because so many people in the church, they kind of get a little high and mighty when things like The Chosen come around because they're new artistically. And the church forgets what the arts are about. The arts are about telling the truth, but the way you have to get there is through dramatizations. And people look at a dramatization as a falsity. And the reality is it's the only way to show the truth.
yeah,
But you have to do it through scenes that are not in the Bible. Because how are you going to get there? You got to get there by telling a story. And so, like we stated many times before, like, and this House of David story, the choice to make him like a bastard child, it's not like they just were like, I just want to add things to scripture. I'm just going to add things to scripture. No, they're trying to tell you the real story of the Bible, and they have to get there through telling a story. And
yeah,
that means a dramatization that has things that weren't mentioned in scripture. This is just
hmm
how the arts works. And then what you have to do is glean from that story the truth.
hmm
That story is not in those details, or the truth is not in those details,
hmm
right? The truth kind of comes out beautifully in time like a flower blooming
yeah.
as you watch good art, you know. And
Well, I like,
sometimes when you're in like a museum and you're looking at a great painting, you don't just look at it and go, "Oh, that's a thing." You don't do that. You stare at it, possibly for half an hour
yeah,
to get kind of like the main idea. And then you go, well, is it in the details or is it in the main idea? Is it in the colors or is it in the composition? What is it in? What is the truth in? The truth has got to come out of it and penetrate you. And you kind of have to let it do that. You have to let it penetrate your mind. And then and also knowing facts about the story it's telling is going to really help you. So if you actually know the Bible, this is why I say I've been waiting for artists to actually tell the Bible the way it's written, because the way it's written, it's dark, it's violent, it's got lots of sin depicted in it. And that's the point. And a lot of Christians don't want to hear about that.
Yeah, yeah, the
Well, you're
Bible is
not reading the
R-rated.
Bible.
Yeah.
You're not letting God speak the truth to you through the Bible.
Well, I liked the decision about his mom. And that's another aspect of it is that his mom has passed away. Like we don't really know what happened, but she's just not a lot. It seems like she's passed away. She's gone.
Yeah,
And so this is very sad. His memory of her is a really beautiful scene where he's playing his lute and he's thinking of her. He's remembering her teaching him a song and he's singing it with her in his memory. Oh,
yeah,
it was crazy. It was good.
yeah,
But I like that because it can, in a way, it can help explain if he has this longing for his mother, it kind of explains some of his woman troubles that come up later on.
good point. Yes.
Which is always like, I always wondered about that. Like, why did that happen?
Hmm.
Um, and so in a way, that could be that could help explain some of that. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
but there's so many Psalms that are messianic that, refer to Christ or prophesy of Christ that I've always thought that a movie about David or a show about David would just have to contain visions. Like it would just
Yeah.
have to contain David having visions of another king, a king that was going to come later on. He would never see him in the flesh, but this king was going to come from his own family line. And this king is the king.
The real deal.
Yeah. And
It's
so
so important to show. You're absolutely right, because
they do.
David actually failed many times, and David was on the outs many times. Sometimes he was on the run and he made mistakes, and now his life was threatened. And he's like, God, when is there going to be peace? How is this going to work itself out? And God will give you answers sometimes. And that
Yeah.
answer is, hey, David, someone's going to come from your line who's the real deal. All this
Yeah.
stuff will be solved. You don't have to worry about it. It's not about you. So, so this provides room for David to repent and to restore the kingdom when God is
Yeah.
really comforting him that way. And so hopefully there's going to be moments like that in here where
Right.
David is on the outs. He's not like one of the things I didn't like about things. I know I mentioned the leader bit where it's like, no, actually God was their leader. And thankfully, by the end of the story, by the end of this episode, they did resolve that, because uh, Samuel does say what I'm saying, which is that, hey, remember, God was always your leader, and that's important to remember. Um,
I was going to ask you your thoughts on some of those scenes at the end where Samuel is confronting Saul. I
yeah,
feel
or
like
the other way
you want
around,
to
right?
talk
But
about
yeah, no, you're right. Samuel's confronting Saul. This is so important because this speaks of the kind of Bible story that I want more of, which is the true heart of God coming through the Bible. And some of this we will talk about also when we talk about the Academy Awards, because this is an important factor in how God does things versus how we do things, and how success happens as a, in with God as opposed to with man. And so Samuel is, as they say, the last of the seers. This is like a prophet, right? But the prophets specifically, you could say he's like the first prophet, the last seer, um, which was seers was during the judges, the prophets during the kings, essentially. And
Mm.
what the prophets do is they basically warn the leadership or warn the culture or warn the king that if they're going in the wrong direction. And they
Hmm.
also kind of like give a heads up on what God wants to do and what we're supposed to be doing, what's expected of us. And so they serve as a mouthpiece for God in a way.
Yeah.
And Samuel says himself, I'm only a messenger. I'm not a sorcerer. Saul thinks of him as a sorcerer because of some of the cool things you see in this scene, which is really, really impressive. The way Samuel and God interact. Obviously, Samuel is just being obedient as an obedient servant, but this means doing hard things,
Hmm.
right? And so when Samuel shows up in Saul's tent, but this is by the end of this, by the the middle to the end of this episode, Saul has been enjoying the fruit of his plunder, right? Much of which he's not supposed to be enjoying because Samuel says, God says, do not keep any of this junk and you got to kill this evil king. And he doesn't do these things.
Yeah, he's not supposed
So,
to take any plunder,
right.
anything from.
Kind of the way it starts is like, oh, Sam Saul's been leading for 25 years, and by the end, by now he's gotten a little bit egotistical because he keeps winning battles, and he starts to think that maybe he doesn't need God, or at least God is just kind of like in the back seat, and what he says is like a suggestion by now, and Saul is mighty. But the truth is, as you'll see in this interaction, Saul is actually quite a fearful man, and he actually fears the people. And so Samuel kind of brings this out of him, this truth out of him.
Hmm.
And Samuel really scolds him and says, how could you not fear the Lord and fear man? It's ridiculous. That's silly. You should be fearing God, not man.
Yeah.
And so his weakness is revealed as someone who fears man by this time. So he comes off as this really great guy, but actually he has become very fearful of his fellow man. And this is why he gives them the plunder, right? He's given them
Yeah.
the plunder as favors so they will stay away from him and respect him. And he's building monuments to himself and his own glory instead of to God.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so this is supposed to give him stature so that he doesn't have to fear man, obviously. But God is like, by this time, Samuel shows up with like judgment because what he's heard from God is, God is done with you. That's basically what God's message is to Saul. And not only is God done with Saul, but Samuel is has to kill this evil king, and it's done in all of its glory in this show. It does not shy away from the violence and the blood of this old seer killing this witchcraft king who's been
Yeah.
cursing people while he's there in the tent.
Right.
And Saul has been bringing this into his household and doesn't realize the power of these things and the importance of following God here. So and then they show this kind of visual effect, right, of Saul kind of losing his sanity. It's almost like Nebuchadnezzar, right, losing his sanity.
Yeah.
Um and which is also in the Bible, of course. And God can I've just taken your sanity from you, right?
Hmm.
And so and so because this happens, he assumes Samuel's like some kind of sorcerer. He's like, I'm not a sorcerer. I'm just here to provide the truth. I'm here to be a messenger. And so, but it's done in just a way that's like it makes Samuel look like amazing, like he looks like Gandalf or something, which is
Hmm.
really, really kind of cool the way they
Yeah,
do that.
I noticed that too. I don't think that was
That's not by
unintentional.
accident. Yeah, that was not by accident at all.
It was cool.
Yeah. So, it does obviously he's like, I love that because it's like they make him look like Gandalf, but at the same time they're like, no, no, he's gonna say this line, which is, I'm not a sorcerer, I'm
Right.
just a messenger
Yeah.
of God. And so
Just to be
you get the
fair.
right message from it, right? You're getting the right message.
Yeah.
Um, I'm very pleased with the show, although I didn't like the fact that we still have the commercial Amazon membership, and there was like a bunch of commercials. It was really annoying. So I don't know if we're gonna be able to fix that, but I don't know how much more it costs, but it was kind of annoying.
Guess we got to do some research on that.
Yeah, or pay them or something, because that was pretty, I mean, this is a little too mature of a show to show our kids. So I guess we can tolerate it for a while, but like, I'd rather not have the terrible commercials for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, House of David is quite an impressive show. I did an article on it already, a few articles, I guess. And this could be like the next big series after The Chosen. Um, and it is in the vein of The Chosen. So if people are upset by The Chosen, they should probably be upset by this show as well,
Yeah.
because they are taking liberties in places. And they even give the disclaimer, the same kind of disclaimer you saw in the 50s with the Ten Commandments, which nobody was upset about, as they knew how art works, is like,
Mm.
this is a dramatization. This
Yeah.
is not real.
Yeah.
Some of these things did not happen in the Bible, so we took some liberties. And so nobody has to get upset about this because we can understand how art works and understand that this is not to be taken as scripture,
Right.
but it is supposed to teach the truth. And that is what it does. It teaches the truth of how great our God is and how he can work through a shepherd boy, um, if he has faith in God.
Yeah.
So that's a beautiful, beautiful lesson for us.
He lifts up the lowly.
Yeah. So House of David, great stuff. And I can't wait to see the next two episodes with you.
Yeah.
I think it'll be
Yeah.
great.
Me too.
Um, so yeah, what is coming up next? Our main topic is about the Academy Awards.
The the Oscars.
Yeah, the Oscars. So why am I talking about this? Obviously, the Academy Awards are going on right now. And you know, Media Moses is a news entertainment website where we talk entertainment news. Do I ever talk about the Oscars? Do I ever tell people? No, I don't do that. Why is it I don't talk about the biggest awards show on Media Moses ever? Because the Oscars is about Hollywood. The Oscars is about the Hollywood infrastructure,
Yeah.
the Hollywood actors, the Hollywood technicians, the Hollywood craftsmen, the business in Hollywood. And so everybody knows by now that the Academy Awards isn't what it used to be. Gee, I wonder why that is. Because it's Hollywood, right? And Hollywood has a certain culture, and that culture is something that I don't believe in. I don't believe in that culture. I don't believe in working in Hollywood. I don't believe in caring about Hollywood films. I don't believe in caring about the streamers in Hollywood. I don't care about that culture. Now, you could call that extreme on my part. I think that people who care about Hollywood are extreme. I'll be honest. And the reason is because I'm an artist, but I at least know that religion and culture are more important than art. They're more important. So if you're thinking that Hollywood's culture is not going to rub off on you because you just want some good art, you fooled yourself into thinking that the Academy Awards can be redeemed, the Academy Awards can be a good thing. That culture is not a good thing, right? That religious system. I think of it as a religious system because I don't think any system um, that seeks to substitute religion is not itself religious. It substitutes religion with another religion, you know, as has been true for every secularist institution that seeks to substitute religion, whether it's evolution or Marxism or what have you. All of them substitute religion with its own religion, which is a belief system. And Hollywood has a belief system. It has its own religion. And so, when you watch the Oscars, you're watching a group of religious people do their religious thing, right? And it's like you're going to church, but it's not Christianity. It's some other faith, right? So the world's value system is built on things like money, fame, power, virtue signaling, like public virtue, not private virtue, right? How do you look in front of the camera? This is all things that Hollywood cares about. This is not things that Christians care about. Christians are virtually the opposite of that value system. And so when Christians come around, they're like, oh, this is an innocuous thing. Hollywood's an innocuous thing. No, you're living in the opposite world where you get paid good money. And that's the problem with that is your value system is backwards. So, and this is why our art isn't so good now, right? And Hollywood's just going down and down and down every year. So the problem is, as we at Media Moses talk about, our job is actually to leave Hollywood. We have to take an exodus out of Hollywood. And that means you can't just reform the Academy Awards. You can't just reform Hollywood systems, the Golden Globes, and all that stuff. It can't just be reformed. It has to be substituted by something better. So we're going to talk about how this can be done because there were some tweets that I made about this recently, and it inspired me to talk about this because many people don't know that this is a possible thing to do. This is very possible to substitute Hollywood and substitute um, the Oscars. So let me see if I can bring this up. Okay, here's my tweet. I responded to Matthew Marsden. If anybody knows who Matthew Marsden is, he's a former actor. He worked on, I believe it was Reacher a few years ago. And Matthew Marsden says right here, I keep telling people we should produce an alternative to the Academy Awards on that night. It would get huge numbers. Of course, he's correct. It would get huge numbers, especially if it's on the same night. But this is an important factor here. I'm glad that Matthew Marsden is saying that way because you have to say it that way because the truth is you have to substitute Hollywood institutions with better institutions. It can't just be another institution. It can't just be like, well, here's my other awards show. And so everyone's supposed to show up at your awards show. No, you have to figure out what's wrong with the old thing, kind of fix that problem with your new thing. And so if you don't figure out kind of what's wrong with Hollywood, what's wrong with the Academy Awards, any attempt to produce an alternative to the Academy Awards some people might be excited about it for like 5 minutes just because it's not the Academy Awards, but then they're not going to stick with it, right? Because it doesn't really solve the problem. And so it is important that you do have to solve the problem in order to make an institution that actually will succeed in substituting the Academy Awards. So what is the problem with the Academy Awards right now? Well, like I said, it's a Hollywood institution, but number two, and most recently, it is all about DEI and about virtue signaling to the Hollywood woke crowd, which is their religion. Um, and so you have to literally repudiate that whole concept and say that you're not going to do any of that stuff and that you don't believe in that. So that essentially is pro-Americanism. It's being a pro-American. So you have to have a pro-American award show. That has to be made very clear. Um, and I like using the word pro-American because it offends people in this other group who they think that they're pro-American, but they're really not. And so the idea is you actually have to offend them because then they're going to realize, oh, you actually caught them on a lie, which is that they kind of try to come off as pro-American by being liberal. But liberalism is kind of dead right now. And actually, wokeism has replaced it, and which means that they've become anti-American. And many liberals don't even realize this, that they've become anti-Americans. But if you just listen to them for 5 minutes, they'll tell you how anti-American they are. So you have to kind of break that cognitive dissonance by coming out and saying, we're pro-American. We're not like you guys, right? So that's one of the ways you have to do that. But I respond here to Matthew Marsden and I say, I've been working to do this, which is the alternative to the Oscars, which is true. A future-minded streamer, which I said I misspelled it, but a future-minded streamer such as Lore TV, plus good reviewers like Film Threat, along with some bigger YouTubers, might be an avenue to get this done. Everything else, like the venue, would be cake. Just form the alliance. I like to plug Lore TV because they're pretty cool guys. And a lot of people don't know about them, but they should. I would plug Angel Studios or Daily Wire if they would give me the time of day. But those guys are too big for their britches now. And I also don't know if they'd be interested in a project like this. Frankly, they might be more into themselves than about some kind of cultural institution to replace Hollywood in kind of a way that doesn't make them look like the biggest thing on the block. So Lord TV, I think, would be better at that. And I think the important thing here is just like how I said, this isn't a pro-American thing. It has to be a pro-American thing. Lord TV gets behind that idea. And I don't know if the other two do. I think that they would, but I don't know if they'd be bold enough to say it that way. I think the Daily Wire might, but I don't know if Angel Studios would. So that's what I mentioned, but I think it's important to talk about the fact that what I say the avenue to getting there isn't just like the way that a lot of event people would go about it, which is thinking about the event itself. How are you going to get sponsors, right? How are you going to get email lists to send to blast out to people? How are you going to get the venue and all of those things and the team that you're going to need to run maybe this nonprofit or whatever it is that you're going to have to be running now. And so that is difficult. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that that's not super important to do, but the truth is you have to think bigger than that. You have to think about big players who can form an alliance, and in forming that alliance solves those other smaller problems. So it provides you with a lot of the sponsorships. It provides you with a lot of the teams that you're going to need. It provides you with the funding you're going to need to get the venue. It provides you with the fans and the excitement required to blast out the emails and send the advertising out. So that's what you have to do. You have to think bigger than the typical event person would think. And how are you going to achieve those things, right? And then there's also the skill set required to actually run this enormous event. This is an enormous event. And it's not because the venue is enormous. It doesn't have to be like a stadium-sized venue. No. And that means all the switchboards and all the electronics and all the stuff required. It's not like rocket science, right? It's not like any of that stuff. Um, it's enormous in the sense of the financial requirement, the financial outlay required. You're talking about security out the wazoo, and you're talking about kind of like the sort of producing that is world-class producing. You have to get the perfect shots. You have to get the people behind the switchers that have done this for 20 years. Like you need that kind of stability behind this event. And so bigger players like getting big streamers. I do think someone like Daily Wire could help with some of the funding, some of the sponsorship and funding. Those kinds of things are going to be necessary and useful. But I think also getting kind of like a lot of the young people, like I mentioned, bigger YouTubers, right? I think this is going to be an important element that I think a lot of people would miss. And a lot of the reason that they would miss it is because they're thinking, this is the film industry. This is like film awards. This is not about YouTubers and creators on YouTube, right? You're wrong. This is about creators, but most importantly, this is about the future, not about the past. And you could say, well, film is in the past. Well, that's also not true. Film is not some past thing. People are making hundreds of films every year still. The truth is that the aesthetic has changed. That's true. And maybe the place you watch the film has changed. That's true. But that doesn't mean the film as an art form is gone. That's ridiculous. So the YouTubers, you know, that I see, that I watch, that I talk to are people who still respect the film art form. And they would love to make films. And sure, they might break a few eggs on the way there and they might change things up every now and then. That's just creativity. That's just being creative. So there's nothing wrong with that. But what it does most of all is it provides a lot of buzz for people in places like YouTube and social media when the Oscars is barely even showing up as a blip on these places. And like, it's like, who cares when you're on YouTube or you're on X or you're on Facebook? Who cares about the Oscars? Nobody cares. So this is like old legacy stuff. And the truth is, the evidence of that is in the infrastructure. Like the people that are showing up in social media and YouTube are the people that are the future. And the people that are just showing up on legacy TV, and in Hollywood trades and in the Hollywood media, these are people that care about the old things, the Oscars and stuff, right? So you have to do that switch. You have to switch over to like the YouTubers and the social media people and you don't have to do all the weirdos, right? The ones that are just kind of they're not they're not the kind of people who would be part of an award show. YouTube and social media is a diverse place. Not everybody's going to care about this stuff, sure. But there are the people who are artists on there who really do care about it. And so these people can serve as marketing, they can serve as media, they can serve as filmmakers themselves and voters in this replacement academy, right? So this is kind of Academy Awards is structured like a nonprofit where you have all these academy voters and they vote for the nominees and then they vote for the winners and all that stuff. So the pool of people who are in the academy are really important. It's a really important pool of people. So that pool of people has to change. Has to be a different kind of people. And these are the people who care about the future of film, not the past of film. So that's why I mention all this stuff. These are like future-minded streamers like Lore. These are like future-minded reviewers like Film Threat. And these are like future-minded artists like YouTubers. So this changes the very culture. You're setting up a foundation that changes the very culture of this new award show, right? And you could even change the format for the award show. But in a way, award shows are award shows. They're a place for glitz and glamour and all that cool stuff and really, really good, high quality professional level stuff. So, and then you have celebrities doing all these, saying the names and announcing and hosting and all these things. That's all going to be necessary and important, you know. You can't take the human element out of it. There's the human element of the show. And you want the show to be good enough for that people who were in the legacy award show would switch over to this and would enjoy it. So you don't want it to be so different from the original that you can't enjoy the new thing. But there has to be a cultural element that's new, that's different, that's the future, right? So you have to set out to achieve that first. And so once you have this sort of alliance between these kinds of people, it doesn't have to be just these people, right? It can be more people involved. But I think there's this kind of minimum level of people you're going to need. And then you can pursue actually doing it, putting it together. But you have to talk about the philosophy of it too, how things need to change, right? In order for you to achieve all this stuff. So my belief is that the Academy rewards Hollywood culture heroes, Hollywood cultural heroes, more than it awards the great art in
Mm.
Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so, sure, there's going to be an element because they have to create the pretense that they care about the art and the craft. And because that's what it always was about before. And so, this is a traditional institution. They don't want to be seen deviating too far from the original traditional thing. And if nobody cares about the craft of film, because the Oscars has left it, well, you're going to have to make a new award show that cares about the craft of film. And Oscars doesn't want to lose all their old people. So they just think that they can include something else in there, more of the politics of it, which since the 70s has been a bigger thing that the Academy Awards started adding into it, the messaging, the kind of the political messaging that Hollywood does. And of course, this is the thing that's eventually destroyed the Academy and destroyed Hollywood itself, is all of the grandiose kind of like soap boxing that these celebrities tend to do now. They used to just advertise their product and make money and care about the craft. And now they're just kind of more like political shills. So this is a really big mistake on Hollywood's part. You have to kind of like go back to more, I think, what it should have been, which is about the art form of film. The Academy Awards is about film primarily, the art form of film, and that's taken shape mostly as feature films and short films primarily. And so series are a thing, it's important. But I think streamers have kind of like taken the series in such a great different direction, kind of like we talked about House of David, right? It's such a different direction. Frankly, I think you need another award show for
Mhm.
series. I just think it's a different art form.
Yeah.
And streamers have done this thing where now you have this whole like bingeable content And it's like almost like a never-ending treasure trove of content to
Hmm.
where it's not even about each individual show anymore. It's about like this kind of generalized feeling of whatever kind of feeling the streamer's trying to give their audience, but like, of home or of safety or whatever it is. But like they're trying to create something different with these series. It's
Yeah.
it's a very, they want you to be on their app 24/7 if they can.
Hmm.
And so this is kind of what they're trying to do. With film, is not that way at all. Film is like the classic blue collar workers entertainment outlet for that's cheap. Like literally it's cheap, but the great thing about it is it's cheap, but it's high caliber art at the same time. So you might go once a week to the theaters, spend 2 hours, spend $20 or whatever, and then you've got a story to think about the rest of the week. And it's a really good story, right? And that's not what streamers do, right? They take up your whole evening at home. Like that's what they're doing. And they're taking up your whole week in bingeable content. And so these are as a result, these are two very different art forms. The film has to grab you immediately and take you along this whole 2 hour story and then just drop you off and be like, it's over now. That's very different from these series. So the series is kind of create a relationship with you. This is never ending relationship with you, and so this is why it's all very character driven. And if you can do that, it's really great, but it's just very different from film. That's just my opinion. I think that, certainly you could have an award show with both in it. And sure, many people are going to say the series is very cinematic. That's the quality of the visuals and the quality of the show, sure. But that's not the format of each show. And that's not the effect each show is supposed to have on you. Film is supposed to have a different kind of effect where it's cinched up and complete. You've brought conclusion, you've brought real catharsis to the viewer. And that catharsis gets withheld in many ways in a series and is stringing you along for this cliffhanger over and over. And that's a very different kind of, feeling that you're getting from a series. I think in many ways it's just a very different thing. So, and also I want to respect the craft of filmmaking. I think that filmmaking still deserves a lot of respect. It still has its own kind of vibe to it, its own really professional kind of vibe to it. It's great for the theatrical experience. It's great for like this kind of gig life, you know, where a series it's kind of like a regular corporate job. This is just very different in many ways. Like with films, it's like I want to create this. It's more like a show where you go, like if you're a visual artist, you create a show every now and you put it up in some gallery and you want people to just have a momentary experience and then go home and be like, that was interesting. I'm glad it's over now. I'll do another show next week. Like it has its own flavor. That's not like a series. A series is like you buy the painting and you put it in your house. That's a different thing, you know? So do you want to look at that in your house every day? Sometimes you don't. Like Salvador Dali is a great artist, but I don't know if I want to look at a Salvador Dali every day. Right? Like it's a little bit like melts your brain a little bit, But do I want that every now and then? Absolutely. It's beautiful. It really makes you think. It's kind of mind-blowing art. It's just mind-blowing, beautiful art. So that's what film is, right? It can even offend you and really shock you and all of these things, but you don't want that in your living room every day, you know? Back to like the Academy Awards, right? This is a I think it's to appreciate the film arts. But I think also we have to remember that an awards show is about a culture. It's just like what the Oscars did. The Oscars really helped cultivate the culture of Hollywood and what Hollywood is about. So you can't just ignore the fact that an award show is going to do that. So instead of just allowing it to happen organically and letting whatever culture exists just kind of fill that space in, no, you have to intentionally fill that space with the right culture. There's just no way around that. And so it's important then for you to decide before you're even going to do this, what kind of cultural values do you hold? Right? Like I say, it has to be pro-American. And I think it has to be about Americanism on the level of traditional religious, like Christianity. You know, you don't have to be overt about your Christianity at all, but there needs to be understanding that this is a family, like a family friendly thing where a Christian could just go there and not get offended at the content there, right? Because why? Because they're a traditional American, you know? And so respect for both of those kinds of people is important. And going back and forth between like, yes, we believe in freedom of speech, but we're not crazy. We're not just going to say whatever, right? Freedom of speech isn't for you to just do whatever you want, right? So you have to kind of give respect to the American founders. They were primarily Christians and they understood the value of freedom, and that the freedom was primarily the right to do good in the world, not the right to do just whatever you want. So similarly to this culture, right, that we want to cultivate here, if an awards show is going to happen, obviously the name is important. It's got to be a very standard sounding name. It's not an academy necessarily, but it's got to be something like the American Awards or something like that. American Film Awards or something like that.
Mhm.
It's very standard. It's for the whole nation, it's for the whole country. But it's not about Hollywood because we deem Hollywood to be the past. We think Hollywood's the past. We don't think that Hollywood cares about American values. And this just should be an obvious statement at this award show. It should just be obviously be able to be said matter of factly. And it's not to it's not a let's dump on Hollywood show, though. So let's not misunderstand. We care about what we do. We're not about snubbing Hollywood. We're about caring about what our culture is doing and about rewarding our culture, right? Hollywood doesn't mention Italy and going, well, we're not the Italian show, ha ha ha. No, they're not doing that, and we shouldn't do that to Hollywood. But the truth is, we're not about Hollywood. That's just the truth. And there's a reason for that. So obviously it's going to be mentioned because this is a competing American award show. So it might be mentioned, but it doesn't need to be some contentious thing, right? And it shouldn't be because we're not about that. Primarily, we're about our own culture, caring about our own culture and putting out great stuff. Now, there's some major issues. We should just get this out of the way because I know that a lot of people will be like, Jon, you're kind of nuts. You can't just create this kind of show because who would go to it? Who would watch it? Who cares? And you know what? You actually have a good point. Because why? Because nobody even knows who I am. Why should anybody care? And I agree with you. Who is this guy? You know? So sure, I get your point. But, right, little small things become big plants. And we can't just dismiss things either. Um, and we have to understand that what's needed for a show like this isn't just a bunch of resources. If I get a bunch of resources like these kind of alliance I was mentioning, That's great and all, but you need people to watch it. You need fans who are going to watch it. If they have to pay a $20 cost or whatever to do it, they should be willing to do that. I'm not saying that we're going to charge $20 or something. I'm just saying they need to be fans enough to where they would do something. They would jump over some kind of hoops or something to get there because they're like, I wanted to watch an award show, but I'm not gonna, why would I watch the Academy Awards? Silly. And they're right. And if I'll be frank, even 5 years ago, if there was another award show that was as good as the Academy Awards, but it wasn't the Academy Awards, I'd probably watch that thing. I'd probably be like, switching the channel, right? And a lot of people would do that. So sure, there's going to be like a latent fan base out there who cares about this just like I do. But how are you going to find those people? Right? So that's a problem. And it is a very serious problem. So this is part of why you need that alliance. Part of why you need that alliance is that they can bring people with you. I can bring some people with me. Everybody can bring a little bit with them. But guess what? It's not going to happen tomorrow. And even if you got the alliance together this year, it's not going to happen next year. Why? Because this is still not enough people, still not enough fans. So what you have to do is you have to do what you can at first. You get the show going at first, right? You get the alliance, you get the show doing, you get like, let's say you get 20,000 people to watch this thing. On YouTube, that is like nobody, right? But it's pretty good for an event, frankly. So let's not think about it like, oh, this is so terrible. I only got 20,000 people. Think about it in terms of cultural institutions that have existed throughout history before YouTube existed, right? That's actually a pretty good amount of people, right? Now, understand a lot of these cultural institutions don't just happen, add water and they just happen. No, they don't happen like that. It takes time. It takes every year they're going to make a new one. Every year they're going to do another one. So this really is a marathon you have to run. And you have to understand that this is a cultural institution that you're trying to create. If it doesn't happen, oh well, boo-hoo. I'm so sorry. At least I did something, right? So um this is something you're just gonna have to do every year. And you're gonna have so you have to care about this kind of thing enough to where you're gonna inconvenience yourself every year to make sure that this institution happens and Hollywood does not happen. And that's just something you have to care about that much. So 20,000 comes next year, and then 25 the next year, and then 30 the next year, and then 40 the next year, and then 100,000 after that. Right. And now it's not looking so bad. But like you have to you can't think about it like, oh, we're gonna replace the Oscars one-to-one comparison and no problem. Like I admire that Marsden said, well, we're gonna have huge numbers of people who like I think that's great. And I think he's probably correct because those people exist. I know they exist, but you really do have to reach those people, and reaching those people is not always easy, you know? And so, I have to admit that what the Academy Awards do is not easy to do. I mean, have you seen that stage? Oh my goodness, that stage is like looks gold plated sometimes. I'm like, how do they do that? That's amazing. And then you see award shows from like little festivals. Have you ever been to like a small little film festival? I'm like, this is like so like put together with bubble gum and toothpaste and tape. Like it's just so like silly, you know? And but you know what? People still care about it. People still like it. They still clap. Like they're happy to get an award, even if it's made of plastic. I got a plastic award here somewhere for one of my films. I don't care. I was like, yeah, when I won that thing. Right. So think about it that way. Like there's things you can do in a few years' time, if you just keep doing it every year, plugging away every year, get the right alliances together, and then you're adding something new every year. Add something new every year to where you're reaching another 20,000 people or you're doing something great. And now give it 5 years and you've replaced the Oscars. Okay. But you have to, that's the kind of thing you have to do if you really are serious about that kind of thing. So, I've noticed that people like Matthew Marsden, they're great people, they're well intentioned, they want to do good in the world. But I don't know if they're the kind of person to just put down what they're already doing and literally spend months of their life out of every year to actually replace the Oscars and putting thousands of dollars of their own money into doing that. I don't know if he's willing to do that, right? Like it's easy to put out a tweet. It's hard to do the work. So you really have to care about it enough to really do something about it and put your best foot forward. Like understand that good intentions are not enough. You have to be really smart about this stuff. You can't like half it, excuse my French, but you can't, you got you got to think about how they do these things and do that and better. So, and that's why I mentioned things like including YouTubers, including these future-minded streamers, including people who care about are pro-American and care about the culture improving in the next 100 years, making it a better culture in the future, not just like glomming onto what Hollywood does. Because I'll be honest, like I've said this in many ways before in the past, but I still feel like many people do not get this concept. It's a really important concept. It happened in the end of House of David when Samuel got rid of that evil king. God is like, we're not bringing any of this stuff with us. This comes from an evil kingdom and it cannot add anything good to our kingdom. It just can't do it. Right. And so God thinks about these things differently than we do. You cannot just like put one foot in Hollywood and one foot in this new culture that you want to create and think it's going to work. It's not going to work. You cannot keep any of this culture of Hollywood with you when you go over to the new culture. You have to shun it. You have to shun the culture and be like, I can't believe I did that. And here's why, right? You can't just say, oh, I don't like it anymore. That's not enough, you know? Because it's a very convenient decision to make at a certain point. If everybody's moving over to this new culture, oh, I'm just going to go over like everybody else. No, that's not good enough. Like you actually have to understand that values matter. Values matter. The values of Hollywood are affecting many people for bad. And if you take those same values with you over here, this is going to become the same corrupted thing that Hollywood is. You got to transcend those values. Understand, you have to understand why they failed. You really have to be willing to change your thinking, change your heart on this matter, because Hollywood has become this way after many years of decadence. And people looked the other way over and over and said, well, I'm making money. At least I'm making money. I got a job. I'm just working. I'm just following orders. Mein Kampf. That is not that is not how it's supposed to work. Like when Netflix puts out the movie Cuties, you need to leave. It's time to leave because that is disgusting. That's just evil. And Disney does the same kind of stuff. You got to leave, man. That's an evil culture that wants to corrupt people. So, you know, this that in that story of House of David, right? God commanded him to get rid of these evil people, and they really were evil. You have to understand the nature of evil. Or maybe you don't have to. You just have to obey, right? Have to obey God. But, you know, obviously, I'm not saying we're fighting a war the way they were fighting a war. That was a physical war. This is an ideological war and a cultural war. And so this takes some work, right? It's not the same kind of work. It's, you know, but there is obedience involved, and you do have to follow God where he calls. And so that's the question is where is he calling you? Is he calling you away from Hollywood? There's a reason to listen to that. There's a reason you need to listen to that. So these are the kind of people we need, people who have heard the call away from Hollywood and who are saying, yes, God, here I am, right? And I mean, if you really want to follow God and if you really want to reform your life and make it better, you're going to have to do some soul searching and understanding that sometimes you just need to obey. Other times you go, but God, why? And he says, well, here's why. And you got to do some reading in the Bible. You got to be willing to do some studying. You might have to be willing to become a Christian to change things around you and even to witness to people around you on the film set to be like, this needs to change. Things need to change around here. It's not going well. But you know, I would just leave Hollywood, frankly. I would leave Hollywood. Don't buy their product. And when you've gotten that influence out of your life, you can then start to think about, well, what can I build that can compete with Hollywood, as in make Hollywood obsolete? Not as in creating the same kind of product, because that's not really competing anyway. Competing is doing something transcendent than the last guy, something better than. You got to figure out what is better than by figuring out the weaknesses of the last thing, the things that they don't have. The thing that they don't have is God. That's what they don't have because they've shunned God from their lives, right? That's the first step. But second of all, you got to find those old stories in Western civilization that have God embedded, impregnated in those stories is the truth of God's wisdom, right? And when we just ignore this heritage, it's not good for our culture. And that's why I'm talking about the Academy Awards, right? And this new award show, because what this new award show can do is remind all of us what great storytelling really was meant to be, what it's supposed to be. And that is storytelling that encapsulates truths and values in it that improves our culture. Not just like gross, disgusting, immoral stuff. That's not going to improve your culture. So we're here for it. We hope that you know, other people will jump on this bandwagon, give us some support, give us ideas if you like. But understand that in many ways there's only one way you can go with this, and that's out of Hollywood and making something better. And the best way to find the best ideas is to listen to God about it. God's got the best ideas. So,
Amen.
yeah. Any thoughts, Rebecca?
Yeah, Start with a new foundation.
Yeah, amen. So, can we replace the Oscars? The answer is yes. Will we? I don't know, but if we can do it, it's only because we're listening to God and our values have changed and we've decided not to take Hollywood with us in our hearts, right? You know, Lot, when he left Sodom and Gomorrah, his wife didn't really leave. She looked back and she became a pillar of salt. That's what we cannot do, right? So God is trying to save us and help us. And it was said in the Bible that when that angel grabbed Lot's hand and pulled him out of there, that was against his will. It describes that as mercy of God. So someone's trying to pull you out of Hollywood, you need to go with them and recognize that that's mercy. That's not just someone just trying to get in your way, push you around, take a job from you or whatever. You know, not nice people. What, you can, sure, you can take it as an offense, but really it's the mercy of God trying to come to you and pull you out of this terrible culture, which leads to bad things. So Hollywood's going down now, man. They're losing tons of money. They're bleeding all this money. People are going to be leaving in droves, you know? It's hard to even live in California, so um things are going to change. It's time for things to change. But it'll probably take a few years before a lot of these stuff will be replaced, but it can and will be replaced. So whether you're part of that or not, I hope you are. But I'm going to be part of it. So follow along if you want to. All right, guys. Love you. Have a great weekend. And where can people find you, Rebecca?
People can find me on Substack and on YouTube and on Facebook.
Oh, yeah. And I am also on YouTube. You can find me at Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft on YouTube. And you can find me at John Edward Croft and the Media Moses on X. And you can find me at MediaMoses.com, where I do some writing there. And
Yeah,
I'm trying to start more on Substack too. We'll see.
you can read some amazing articles on MediaMoses.com.
Thank you. That's sweet of you. All right, guys. We love you. Have a great weekend and stand up for the culture. I could just keep going with it. All right, guys. Good night. Enjoy yourself. Bye.